Thank you very much. Many thanks for the invitation. It's a very impressive conference, and more generally, I would like to say that what the Central Bank of Chile is doing in statistics is really impressive. Two warnings before starting my presentation. First, I draw on work that is being done by the committee, the Irving Fisher Committee on Central Bank Statistics, which is chaired by a group of central banks, and Gloria Peña is one of the chairs of this group. And second, this presentation draws also from a paper that I published in Eurostat statistical papers. So, if there are questions, you don't direct the questions to me, you direct the questions to Gloria and to Mariana. So let me start with big data, but from quite a different angle, and really on the combination between big data and the micro data revolution. I will have a few points. First, I will discuss why micro and macro are becoming very important and interlinked. What are the opportunities? What are the challenges? And what are really central banks telling us when they are working with these big data sets? And I will finish with some examples drawing on our statistics that we publish at the BIS. So, rapidly, you all know this, but I think there was a wake-up call after the crisis that we need to look at not just the macro aggregates, but also micro data. So the forest, but also the trees in the forest. And in fact, if you look at what we call the Data Gaps Initiative, so this big initiative to enhance statistics for the G20 economies, and in fact, a lot of countries around the world are also participating in this initiative, really there is a focus to combine micro and macro levels. And then we turn to, for central banks, what is really big data in the financial sectors? And I would call it financial big data. And here, it's really not just the internet. Internet can be useful. You have central banks using Google searches, Twitter message, etc., all what was presented before. But it's not just that. It's also all the information that is available. So the definition would be more what is organic data that exists, that you can make use of, and perhaps that was existing for decades. And it's very different from traditional statistics, which are design data. So you have a survey or you have a census to have statistics. And these organic data are byproducts of all our activities. Can be internet, can be the digital footprints, as we saw, but it can be also financial activities, can be commercial activities like credit card operations, and even more so, can be administrative activities, registers, for example, or tax registers. So, in a sense, most of this information is relatively large, very granular, very micro, relatively well structured. Think of registers. Think also of text. Text is something that we call unstructured data compared to statistics, but language is something that is also very structured. And also there is a lot of private providers, so it's not just public authorities, it's all over the place. So to summarize, you have something, at least for central banks, you have the combination of two things, the digitalization and the financial crisis, and the importance of making more use of all what is available in terms of granular information. And in fact, you can simplify and say that this financial big data, you have, of course, web-based indicators, but you have a lot of things coming from financial market data, from administrative records, or commercial data sets. One example, just to convince you, but think of financial markets data, tick-by-tick data. So looking at what's going on in the financial markets, seconds after seconds. We are just at the beginning of exploiting this information. For some central banks, it's very important. For example, in Japan, they are looking at this tick-by-tick information just to look at the liquidity of the markets for the government bonds. And this is becoming very important. And now, all this information was already existing, but now we are able to use it. Opportunities, I will go rapidly. 5 key messages I would like to say. First, there is micro information that is relevant from a macro perspective. It's not just that you aggregate micro information. It's micro information is important in itself. And why? Because you have micro situations that can be systemically important. And we saw this during the crisis. And if, in fact, it's nonlinear. So if you aggregate micro information, you can miss information, you can miss risks, because you are not looking at individual situations. And that's why, at least at the BIS, we are monitoring global institutions, global banks, and we do this. So we collect information from 25 banks around the world, and the idea is not to aggregate the information for the 25 banks. This aggregation is not very meaningful. What is really important is to look at the situation of each of the systemic banks compared to the others. And you could make the same argument for other statistics that we collect on derivatives. So derivatives markets, you have a lot of key players in the derivatives markets, on the repos markets, etc. Second point is that distribution is also very important. You really need to go beyond the aggregates and to look at the distribution. So are you looking at households that are poor, households that are rich? Yesterday we mentioned SMEs versus big multinationals, etc. So you really need to have more view on the distribution of the information. And this has clearly become important after the crisis because of the policy response. I have an example. You have what we call macro-prudential tools. So mainly central banks involved in this. And for example, you would like to target a very specific market, property markets. Or you want to have a look at specific groups. So for example, the people that are the first home buyers, so, or financial investors. But you want to separate the groups you are looking at. Then you want to look at very specific instruments. You can look at mortgages. You can look at mortgages that are indexed or not on interest rates, on short-term interest rates, etc., etc. So really, if you want to have these macro-prudential tools, you really need to go deeper in the aggregates and to have a sense of what is beyond the aggregate information. Of course, you still have a usefulness of this micro information to construct traditional macro aggregates, because it's like Legos. So you have a lot of small points and you can compile and re-aggregate. And the better the small granular elements are good, if they are good, then the aggregates is better. And of course, central banks are very much interested in this very granular information to construct macro aggregates. For example, loan by loan data sets, security by security data sets. Security by security is almost a necessary condition to construct flow of funds, for example. You need to have this kind of information to construct these macro aggregates. And why is it useful? Because you have a lot of advantages. First, they are very large. You cover the entire economy. It's very flexible. You can recombine. And in addition, normally, it's not a burden on the economy. So you are not designing a new statistical survey. You are just making use of information that is already collected, in theory. Fourth opportunity, the fourth one, is policy design. So after the crisis, clearly there is a move also to have more evidence-based policy. It's particularly true for micro-prudential authorities, so people that are supervising banks or insurance. They really want, when they set up rules, to have an estimation of the impact. And for this, you need to go granular. You need to look at what will be the impact of the measures that you want to mobilize. And for example, at the BIS, we have what we call the quantitative impact studies. So basically, it's a panel of 250 banks around the world, and we collect granular information. And then, when we calibrate, for example, the implementation of Basel III for the Basel Committee, you estimate the impact on this panel of banks. But for macro policies too, you really need to have this impact assessment for macro-prudential authorities, for fiscal authorities, for structural policy, and of course for monetary policy. Think, for example, of all the non-conventional tools. And here you have really a lot of advantages of having microdata. First, it's granular, so you can capture a lot of very different dimensions. It's very rich because you can use the same data for different policy, different policymakers or different type of policy. It's flexible. Again, you don't have to do another data collection. You just have, as I said, for the QIS data, you have this panel of 250 banks, and you use the information that you have collected in a very flexible way. And it's very rich because you can understand the feedback effect, the response of the economic agents, the consequence of policy decisions, and cross-impact also across policies. So I think we are really just at the beginning of making use of all this information for policy design. And the last point, and I will come back on this because this is really important, is that because you have this new way of looking at the information, you can also have new insights. You have a much broader view of the population of interest over a long period of time because you have these data sets that have been available for quite a long period of time. The information was not exploited, but it's becoming to be exploited. And here we can definitely look at the Google and Amazon, etc., to have to build on their experience to deal with these big data sets. And here, things like machine learning, artificial intelligence can really help to manage this data. Why do we have new insights? It's because with this new granular information, you have different type of data. You have also an opportunity to see the things in a different angle. And for example, something that we like to emphasize at the BIS is that sometimes when you collect granular information, you can aggregate it in the SNA framework, so on a residency basis, but you can also aggregate this information because it's granular on a non-residency basis, for example, a nationality basis. And I will come back to this. For example, a big data set that we collect on behalf of the central banks at the BIS is what we call international banking statistics. So we collect information on 2,500 banks, and we publish this information. And we publish this information with two tables each time. One is aggregated, for example, all the US banks, all the banks that are located in the US. So this is the information on a residency basis, and we provide exactly the same tables, but only for all the US banks that are resident in the US or outside of the US, but you don't have the foreign banks that are resident in the US. And this is, you can do this because you have the granular information. Each time you have the data set, you have an attribute that says this is the residency of the bank, this is the nationality of the bank, and you can rearrange the information. Rapidly, challenges, at least for central banks, it's always important to look at challenges and risks. In practice, all this information is very diverse and it's very difficult. Why? Because by definition, it's not designed information. As I said, it's not like traditional statistical surveys. So in fact, the challenge is that you want to use this information for statistics, but indirectly. And you have a lot of issues. The cost, what we just saw before, the compilation of the cost, the quality. The quality can be very bad because at the granular level, there's no proper checks. And also just identifying what you are measuring. So you really need to connect database, and you don't have good identifiers to do that. It's also very complex. So in particular, when you are collecting information that is granular and you want to construct statistics, it depends on the policy question. So in a sense, the way you are dealing with information depends on the question you have. So it can change over time. A good example is that payment systems, so huge information that are collected by central banks, can be useful for people looking at tourism, measuring tourism in an economy, but can be also very useful for people looking in central banks at the supervision of the payments. And the policy need is completely different, meaning that the data that you will construct can be very different. And in addition, there is an interaction between the data that are available, the policy needs, and then, because central banks in particular are policymakers, they are taking decisions based on this data. But because they are taking decisions, then the economic agents will react and change the way they behave. So there is a feedback loop, and this adds to the complexity of what you can do with all this micro information. So some things that can be relevant for explaining a policy decision 5 years ago may no more be relevant because in the meantime you have taken a policy action. So what is really important is to transform this data that my feeling is can be with very little value into relevant information for policy. And again, we are just, I think that's a personal view, but we are just at the beginning of this work. And I'm quoting Jaime Caruana that was saying we should not collect the dots, we should connect the dots. So a third challenge that is at least very important for us in our statistical database is that the information needs evolve over time. So as I said, the financial system can change because of policy actions. And in fact, it's non-linear, the policy action. So when you have fragilities in the economies that are building up, you don't really know where the fragilities are. So in a sense, if you have too much information, very granular, you may be lost in the data and you will not be able to capture what's going on. So from a perspective, you want to spot what is not normal. And perhaps you will be happy to have relatively rough indicators or aggregate indicators. Once you have a crisis, then you want to rapidly dig into the situation and go very micro to understand what's going on. So in a sense, your information need is not linear over time. So before a crisis, can be looking at macro aggregates or imbalances. After a crisis, really you need to go into granular. And then when you have a second crisis, the granular information that was important when you had the first crisis may not be relevant for addressing the question of the second crisis. So this time dependency adds complexity to these challenges for using microdata. Rapidly, what are central banks telling us when they are handling financial big data? Of course, you know, a lot of issues relating to resource, IT, staff, security, how to manage the data. Really the need to revamp completely the statistical production chain, to have good governance, to have who is responsible for the data, for documenting the data, etc. And also you have reputation risk because people are providing data to authorities that are like central banks that have a very high reputation. So people hope that by doing this, the confidentiality of the data will be preserved. They have trust in the institution. So for example, when we collect information for global systemic banks, we spend a lot of time, a lot of security to ensure that the information cannot be leaked. And this is a key reputational risk that could face central banks if the information was leaked. And there are also ethical issues, because if you are using data sets that come from people outside, so your central bank can use data sets coming from commercial data providers, think of Google searches, or Amazon data, or Twitter. The simple fact that you are using the information provided by their commercial providers, and you are a central bank, a public authority, you are giving your reputation. So you are, in fact, endorsing the quality of the data sets. And of course, if you don't really know the quality of the underlying data set, you are taking a risk. Using financial data, big data is also a challenge because of we are not always sure, at least according to what central banks are telling us, of whether the information is accurate. First, you don't really know what we call in statistics the coverage bias. Everybody is not on Twitter. So when you look at Twitter message, you miss a part of the population. And there is also a perception that because you have very large data samples, millions of observations, by definition, the quality is very good compared to a standard statistical survey of 2,000 people. And in fact, if you look at probability calculation, this is not true. So you can have the accuracy of a very large data sample of, for example, 80% of the population that can be not so good compared to traditional statistical surveys. And this is also a reputation risk for the policymakers when they are using this information, because if the information that is used is of poor quality, and if they are basing their decisions, their policy decision on this information, then you have the risk of taking a policy decision that is not well guided, and this would have social costs. And the last point that is mentioned also by central banks is that the risk for decision-making bodies is because you have all this new information coming in, then you have a tendency to react to very new information, short-term information, instead of looking at very long-term issues and like, for example, fragilities developing in the economy. You also want to fine-tune your communication because you can take actions rapidly and see the reaction of economic agents. So you spend a lot of time on working on this feedback loop. And last issue is sometimes you have, in fact, models that are black box, and then you have to communicate why you are taking a decision. So can you come and say, we are raising interest rates because yesterday we were looking at Amazon data or Twitter's messages, and we decided, yes, we have to raise interest rates. This would be tricky. So you need to give a story. And of course, if you have all these black box calculations or very technical calculations, it's quite difficult. Two examples based on the statistics, on the statistical work we have been doing at the BIS that I would like to emphasize. One is what was said before already, the quality of the information. So we had a survey on trade repositories data. So after the crisis, it was decided by the G20 to ask all people to report derivative transactions to trade repositories. And this is a huge amount of information that is just being, in fact, started to be collected and analyzed. And it's very big data. It's 100 million observations per year in Europe, per day. 100 million of data points per day in Europe. And when we ask central banks what we are doing with this data, you see that they say, so when you look at the yellow, so they strongly feel that the data are not harmonized. So in fact, the derivatives recorded by one trade repository, the information is not harmonized with what is reported by another trade repository. Or the transaction is too complex to make useful aggregates, or you cannot cross-check the report, or you have double reporting of derivatives. So you think you are looking at two different trades, but in fact it's the same trade that is reported by two trade repositories, etc., etc. Missing fields. So a lot of data quality issues, and again on this information at the global level, we are still at the beginning of making sense of this information that has been collected for almost 10 years. Another example is a data set that we produce at the BIS, which we call the International Debt Securities. So we collect all granular information on the issuance of debt securities, and we buy this information from commercial data providers. We have a specific definition of what is an international market, and we have criteria to identify what is an international security. And to make it simple, we have 3 criteria to identify this. But in fact, when we do this in a very granular level, sometimes we are not able to identify a security because the information we receive from these data sets can be completely inconsistent. Can be inconsistent within the same data set, or can be inconsistent between two different data sets, two different commercial data providers. So we have to take a probabilistic approach, and we know that when we classify a very simple thing, is it a domestic security or international security? Well, we have significant probabilities that we are wrong, perhaps 5–10%. And of course, we have a lot of quality issues because we know that some data sets, the attributes in this data set is good quality, but for the other attributes, it's not good quality, and the quality can change over time. So we have to switch across data sets, and this decision is also over time. But nevertheless, we think that we can have a lot of insight from this very granular information. First, we can build a lot of indicators, of course, issues, repayments, amounts, etc. We can have very detailed breakdowns that we can modify in a very flexible way, so we can look at only instrument, currency, maturity, type of interest rate, rating of the company, guarantees, etc. We can cross this information, so we can have these dashboards with multiple graphs. And it's very flexible because it depends on the policy question. So the graph will depend on the policy question. And one question that is becoming very important right now is who is really issuing debt in the global market? And this dataset can help to address this question because it's very granular. So the only thing that you need to do is to identify the residency of the issuer and the nationality of the issuer, meaning by whom the issuer is controlled. And if you have this information at the very granular level, then you can really play with this very granular information and reconstruct the aggregates in a very flexible way. So we define nationality as the residency of the parent of the issuer, and we can, for all the statistics, we can compare nationality-based consolidated data and residencies-based data. And just have one graph that we published in the BIS quarterly review last September. And you have so it's debt issuance by countries, developed economies, developing countries, and offshore centers. And you only have, so it's the same reality, but seen from two different angles. One is the residency angle, so the SNA angle, which is the blue color. So you only look at the issuance of the residents of these economies. So for example, in the developed countries, the blue is all what people resident in developed countries are issuing. And the red is the same statistics, but reorganized by nationality. So you look at each issuer and you say, oh, you are a resident of the US, but in fact you are controlled by a developing country. Normally it's the reverse. And then I put you in the developing countries. And what you can see here, starting from the right, for example, is that for the graph on the right, you see the issuance of offshore centers, which has really expanded a lot in recent decades. And you see that the blue is very large. So the blue is all the issuance of companies that are located in offshore centers in the world. When you look at the red, it's very small. So all the issuance of these offshore centers is done by firms that are in fact controlled by firms that are outside of these offshore centers. Of course, it's not new, but it's very interesting. And when you look at developed countries, you see a little bit the opposite. So you see that the blue has become lower compared to the red, meaning that, for example, US companies are more issuing globally than just in the US market. So they are issuing through their resident companies in the US market, but also through the residents of offshore centers that are controlled by these US companies. And when you turn to the middle panel for the developing countries, it's even more the case. So you clearly see that the red is very high, meaning that the issuance of firms from emerging markets is very large in the world, has been growing a lot, but is not done by the residents of these emerging markets. It's done by the affiliates that are controlled by these emerging market firms, and these affiliates are resident in the offshore centers. So it gives you an idea of the flexibility you have when you can have all this granular information that you can combine, and of course you can look at all the attributes you want when you do this recombination. So I hope I convinced you. And the information is on the website of the BIS as well as the reports. Thank you.
Very much, Bruno.